I love books with vampires in them, and this year alone I've read over 20 of them. So for today's video I'm gonna go over the worst to the very best of them. So hi and welcome back my fellow fantasy book lovers, or if you're new here, hi and welcome. My name is Kathy and I'm a fantasy book lover from Belgium. For today's video I compiled a list of all of the vampire themed books that I have read so far in 2024. I'm going to go from the worst vampire themed book to the very best. So stay until the end to know which is my absolute favorite. And if you want a little bit of a spoiler, just look at this shelf. So starting at the total bottom is a duology. This is The Coven and the Cursed by Harper L. Woods. Now in this book, vampires aren't actually mentioned as vampires, they are called vessels. And vessels are not the good ones from Sleep Token, they are actually a type of demonic creature that takes on a host body, hence the name vessel, but they have their demonic mind trapped in that body. I really did not enjoy this duology. Book one was good. Book one I really did enjoy and I read it super fast, but there's a lot of very, very toxic relationship type things happening in it that I didn't really agree with, and in book two it gets worse. So in The Coven and the Curse we follow a female witch who has been held back by her mother, hidden from the Coven. And the Coven is basically all of the known witches and warlocks that are together into this coven. They also have a school where you learn how to develop your skills, etc. Now the day her mother dies is the day that she is being discovered by the Coven, and they actually want to take her back into the school, but there is more plotline going on. At first I loved the female main character. She's very rebellious. She has a super cool personality where she's in this fight mode a lot of times, and she is clever, very clever. Now the moment that she gets connected more to this principal type creature is what I'm gonna call him. He's called a vessel, so he is kind of vampire-ish traits. That's where it's starting to go downhill for me. It's a little bit of insta connection, insta lust for each other, and not in a good way. It felt very strange also because there's a big age gap. They talk about very dark things. Not everything he does to her is consensual, etc. So I personally did not enjoy these books for those reasons. So that was a shared spot 21, which is the lowest of this list. Up next is spot number 20, Court of the Vampire Queen by Katie Roberts. If you like smut with smut and more smut before you even know the names of the characters, then this series is for you. This is apparently a trilogy bundled into one book. It reads very much as not so well written fan fiction. I personally did not enjoy it because it was too much smut. I actually first DNF'd this book, then read a book that was the complete opposite, that had no smut at all, and then picked this one up again. And I struggled because it was so poorly written. There is no other plot line apparently happening except the smut in the book. The things that do happen plot-wise are shady at best, and no, not for me. And for Court of the Vampire Queen, know that this is a reverse harem. So one woman with, I think, 3 men or 4 even, 3, 4, I could be mistaken. And the smut starts happening from literally chapter 1, so do with that information what you want. On spot number 19, we have Filthy Rich Vampire by Geneva Lee. At the moment of recording this video, I actually have all 4 books on my e-reader and have only read the first one, but there are 4 books and apparently it completes the story. In this story we follow a very rich vampire, hence the title, and a poor human. So the human is actually performing at the evening where the vampire is supposed to meet a witch to court and procreate with, etc. But instead he starts focusing on her and he starts actively dating her. And you do really notice at first that this is purely to get out of the entire thing happening with the witch's coven that he needs to pick a mate from. And it's When you watch those telenovelas where it's like overly dramatic highs and overly dramatic lows, that's what this is, but in book form. If you like drama, like pulled out to the max, and if you like very high highs and very low lows, then I would recommend reading these books. However, if you want to start them, at least get book 1 and book 2 ready to read, because the end of book 1 is tough, so you want to start book 2 pretty fast after that. I personally didn't have book 2 and I haven't read it so far, but I know it gets better along the way. On spot number 18, I have Masters of Death by Olivia Blake. This book was highly mismarketed in my opinion. If you look at it, it has like this gorgeous black and red cover with bats on it, and you feel like there should be a lot of vampire in this book. There isn't. And that's the reason why it's so low on my list. In this story, we follow a vampire real estate agent who's trying to get rid of the ghost that is haunting the house that she's trying to sell. And trust me, that description is a lot more promising than what the book actually is about, because they go into like a different realm and there's gods involved, and like it had so much potential but then ruined it. After that, unfortunately, on spot number 17 is the original Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. Why is this so low on my list? Because it was super slow paced, it clearly isn't written for this time, and I just felt incredibly annoyed and bored by this book. It is written in Old English, and unless you are someone like me who wants to have read all of the vampire classics, I would just not bother getting this book. There are way better vampire books for you out there, depending on what you're looking for. Up next, we have A Tempest of Tea by Hafsah Faizal. So we have a band of misfits. Something is happening in the house that they kind of have. It is like a tea house by day and a vampire-like drinking lair by night. And they're just trying to survive. Something happens, so they have to pull off a very particular heist in an important spot of where they are located. And that's what this book is about. The accent is not on vampires, so it's not a vampire-themed book, but there are vampires in it, and some of them might even surprise you. So I did enjoy this book, but do keep in mind this is a YA fantasy book and not like an adult fantasy. It has a little bit like hints of, it's not romance and especially not smut, but it is a little bit of like found family and relationship type romance going on. On spot number 15, we have The Revenant Games by Margie Fuston. In this book, we have a realm that is like divided. The one part of the forest belongs to the vampires, the other part of the forest belongs to the witches, and the zone in the middle is a village where humans can roam safely, and their village is located next to it. Once a year, there is the Revenant Games, in which any of the humans can participate in. If they bring a vampire to the witches offer them to resurrect someone, and if they bring a witch to the vampires, they will get eternal life as like the reward. Our main character is a girl who has lost her sister. Her sister died in the woods, and together with her best friend, she's going to try and get a vampire to the witches so she can bring back her sister. That is the basic setup of this book. The vampires are a lot more prominent in this book, and I did really enjoy the romance line going on. Not a smutty romance, but a YA romance. That's the best way to describe it, and it was rather enjoyable. On spot number 14 is The Last Raven by Helen Glynn Jones. This is another YA fantasy, and in this book we follow a young girl who is the daughter of the two, like the queen and the king of the vampire kingdom. She's their daughter, but she surprisingly is not a vampire. However, she lives in a world with vampires, and there's also humans. So the world is a little bit like our world, but like a dystopian. The vampires have taken over and the humans kind of serve as cattle. That's the best way to describe it. Now this girl has to like be very careful in her environment, and there's also a rebellion going on. So in this book we follow how she navigates life being the heir to the throne but not being an actual vampire, and how that influences her life. And I feel like this book was interesting. There was a lot of building up going on towards the end where I felt a little bit not satisfied with how it ended, but I know this is the first part in a series. And I do want to quickly note that if you read like the resume or the synopsis of the book, there is a spoiler in it that actually only happens at the end of the book. So you're constantly like waiting for it to happen, and you know it will happen, which was unfortunate. If they wouldn't have mentioned it in the synopsis, I would have seen it happen, but not the way that it did. Up to spot number 13, which is for The Scarlet Veil by Shelby Mahurin. This is once again a YA fantasy book, and I absolutely loved it. In this book we follow our female main character, who is part of Les Chasseurs, which is a group of creature hunters. So they hunt demons and evil creatures, but there's also like wizards and warlocks and like other like magical beings in their group. So Sally, the main character, she's actually engaged to Jean-Luc, who is the head of Les Chasseurs, and he's actually overprotective of her. Something has happened in her past, and because of that he doesn't see her as like a strong type of survivor, even if what she did was pretty incredible, to be honest. At the start of the book something happens due to which Sally gets captured and abducted, and she gets taken away with vampires, where she starts to live with them as their prisoner in their castle, and that's where the book starts getting interesting. I really enjoyed this book. This is a YA fantasy book with some romance but no explicit smut, and I cannot wait for the next part in the series. On spot number 12, we have Fang fiction by Kate Stayman-London. This is a romantasy read with vampires. We have our main character, who is a girl just like you and me, obsessed with vampire books. And from this particular book series that she's obsessed with, there's a forum on which she talks, and they actually have like conspiracy theories that the books actually could be based on real people. And one day she meets one of those characters, and they actually end up being from said book series. And they actually ask for her help to help solve a problem that they have. So she actually gets pulled into the world of the book, etc. I loved this book. There is a romance line going on in it. Yes, there is a little bit of spice. I think I would give this 2, maybe 3 chili peppers on a scale of 5. This is one of those books that if you just want one book, not a series, you want a satisfying romance with vampires, then I think you will enjoy this. On spot number 11 is A Werewolf's Guide to Seducing a Vampire by Sarah Hawley. This was Sarah Hawley's newest release in the Glimmer Falls series that actually came out this year. And as the title says it, we have a werewolf who's trying to seduce a vampire. Said werewolf at the beginning of the book has been to the marriage of characters from previous books, and in a very drunk state goes onto eBay and orders a vampire-possessed crystal. So a crystal containing, I think it's described as a vampire succubus. He bids on it, completely forgets about it until the package with said plastic crystal arrives, and lo and behold, an actual vampire was contained by it. So they're trying to solve why she's connected to this crystal, how they can set her free, and of course something more blooms among them. So I really enjoyed this book. Again, an easy romantasy read that leaves you satisfied. This does have spice. I think it's a 3 chili pepper, more or less. On spot number 10, just above it, is Bride by Ailey Hazelwood. Now, I read this book at the beginning of the year. We have our female main character who has been used as collateral when she was a child between the human-vampire-like connections. So they have a human child living with vampires for X amount of years and a vampire child living with humans for X amount of years to keep the peace between them. That period is over. She's actually working in an IT job when she gets called back home to the vampire coven, and she needs to marry a alpha werewolf in order to make a new alliance between vampires and werewolves. They of course have to start living together. She gets introduced into his pack, etc. And this is typical Ailey Hazelwood romance book, but then delving into the fantasy genre. There is one thing that you have to look up before reading this book, and it is the knotting kink. If you have read into that and you're okay with reading things about it, then feel free to continue this book. This does have spicy scenes, especially towards the end of the book. I would give this a 2 to 3 chili peppers, and I found it a very light, enjoyable fantasy romance read. On spot number 9, I have noted An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. This is one of the books that took me by surprise because at first I did not know it had vampires. And apparently after reading it, it should be a more current day retelling or inspired by Carmilla book. And after reading Carmilla, I definitely see some similarities, but honestly, other than the names and a little bit of like the intimacy between the characters, there's not really much that is the same between these books. We have Laura Sheridan and Carmilla. They are both in this school for poetry. Carmilla is like already a few years in this class with a specific teacher, and they both end up being academic rivals. Their professor invites them both to like private classes and special sessions, and something starts blooming between the girls. But then we discover that their professor actually holds a darker secret, and that's where the book really got interesting for me. I could really recommend this book if you're into dark academia and you have a love for vampires. On spot number 8, I have my most recent romantasy read with vampires. It is Bound to the Vampires by Traci Lovelot, and this is actually a trilogy. So there's 3 separate books, well technically 4. There is a prologue that you can also read, and these are a reverse harem fantasy romance, spicy romance. The first book starts out with our female main character. She's actually a demon hunter, vampire hunter, and the realm that she lives in is actually like our world. However, the infernal realms have broken through and they have like containment walls around them, and she's one of the humans trained to kill vampires. Now she has magical powers, and there's different types of magical powers which get explained in the book, and I really did enjoy the magic system. Other than those magical powers, she's of course super strong. She's a real badass. And because of something that happened in her past, she has to prove herself to like her unit or like the company that she works for. So the police kind of basically. She is pulled in to join a unit, a new task force, and they're really basically set up to fail from day one because she is a vampire hunter and she has to team up with 3 vampires, one of who is her ex-boyfriend. And this book actually has a good storyline as well as very good smut. This is very smut intense, so know that before you get started. And it's not only female-male interaction, it's also male-male interactions and more. So know that before you get started in this series. I personally devoured this series. I read the first book at the end of October and then the other 2 at the beginning of November. And if you're into fantasy romance and if you like vampires, if you like badass characters, if you want a storyline that has a purpose, not like Court of the Vampire Queen, then this might be perfect for you. On spot number 7, I have noted The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King by Carissa Broadbent. This was for me personally the least good book by Carissa Broadbent, but it's still very good, so I put it up here. And this follows on Serpent and the Wings of Night, who has spot number 6 on my list, in which we follow the daughter of this vampire king, and she is actually meant to enter a Hunger Games type of contest, and whoever wins this contest is granted a wish by the goddess Nyaxia. So this is book 1, and in book 2 we follow on the aftermath of that situation. This is fantasy first and romance second, so there is more plotline than there is romance in book 1 at least. And in book 2 there were a few annoying elements, as in there is one phrase that I will hate until a very long time after, and it is "there she is," because it's repeated over and over and over again, and it was really not necessary. On to spot number 5 on my list, which is Slaying the Vampire Conqueror by Carissa Broadbent. This is the same author as the previous 2, but a different book. This does take place in the same overall realm, which is the Crowns of Nyaxia realm series, whatever you want to call it. In this book, we follow our female main character who is a type of sorceress, witch, assassin. That's the best way to describe it. And she is part of this coven type situation who assassinates people that they get as a target. And while on a quest, she feels this wave washing over the land, and it is actually a vampire invasion. Now, she is blind. She gave up her sight to have some of her powers, and therefore she is kind of like a seer as well. She wants to kill the vampire conqueror that is invading her lands, but she's called back by her coven to retreat to their like sanctuary and first like make a plan, talk about it. And at first she's refused to do this, but finally they do send her out to infiltrate his ranks, join him, gain his trust, and of course kill him. But that's not really what happens. I loved this book. I loved the build-up of this book. I loved the powerfulness of the main character. I also loved the questioning of some things in these books. So I think this was one of my favorite Carissa Broadbents this year. There's one other, and it's even higher on this list, and you will see that in a moment, but I did really enjoy it. On spot number 4 is the funniest book on this entire list, and it is Stake Around and Find Out by Evie Belknap. In this book, we have a main character who's obsessed with vampires and she absolutely wants to become one, but after years of trying to find a vampire to turn her, she still hasn't found one. So what does she do? She joins a group of vampire hunters to try and find vampires, but things don't really go the way that she planned. This is a very found family type of book. It is a very funny book. There is a little bit of like family and romance in it, but absolutely no smut. So I think if you're into vampires, but you're tired of all the romantasy and all of the smut in all of the books, then this is like a fresh breath of air. And have I mentioned that this book was hilarious? It was amazing. I absolutely loved it. So now we're getting to the top 3, and except for position 1, it was very hard for me to narrow it down. So on spot number 3, I have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This book is written from one of the brides of Dracula, one of his first brides, as she's trying to process everything that's happened with her and Dracula. And fun fact, the name Dracula is actually never mentioned in this book. This is a very trauma-heavy book. There is sexual content in this book. There is abuse in this book. And to me, it hit a particular note because I've been in an abusive relationship in the past, and this really helped me see that it's not really unusual, it's not my mistake especially, and yeah, that I'm not the only one going through these things. So this book had a very therapeutic effect on me personally. It might be heavy for some other people. I found it beautifully written because it's written in letters to herself to help him process the entire situation, and I just found it beautiful. On spot number 2, I have 6 Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This book is also part of the Crimes of Nyaxia series, and this should technically be read between Serpent and the Wings of Night and Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, as the characters from 6 Scorched Roses come into play into Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. However, you can read this beforehand as well, or just totally separately, it doesn't really matter. In 6 Scorched Roses, we follow Lilith, who's a human girl living in a cursed village. The village has a sort of disease that captures the people, that captures the crops, and they're unable to cure it for now. Lilith is actually very smart and she's trying to find a cure. She's actually like researching it and working on it. But for this cure, she decides that she might need vampire blood. And lo and behold, there is one vampire in her proximity, and she goes to him and she exchanges 6 roses for 6 vials of his blood, and she tries to make a cure with those. This is spicy fantasy romance. It has a general plotline of what is happening with Lilith's village, how the curse came to be, etc. But there is a very strong undertone of romance between her and the vampire character. I love this book so much because, first of all, it's a really good read, as in it has a full storyline, but it's also quite short. And this is just my opinion, but I felt this story more whole and complete than Serpent and the Wings of Night and Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. I know there's a lot more happening in those two books than in Six Scorched Roses, but I liked the overall line of the story more. And then on spot number 1 is my favorite vampire book of this year, and it is without a doubt Empire of the Damned by J. Kirstoff. J. Kirstoff has become one of my favorite authors. Last year I completed the Nevernight trilogy and started Empire of the Vampire, which blew me away. And this year Empire of the Damned came out, and yeah, it lived up to its expectations. In Empire of the Vampire, Empire of the Damned, we follow Gabriel de Leon, who is a Silver Saint, which basically means he's the offspring of vampires and humans. So he's kind of vampire, but he doesn't want to become a full bloodlust evil vampire, so they decide to fight said vampires. In the world that this is taking place, this is like a normal fantasy world. However, when Gabriel was young, Days Dead happened, which means that the sun completely disappeared and everything continuously has this dark doom and gloom vibe, which also means crops don't really grow the way they used to, vampires are very overpowered, and humans are just cattle trying to survive, basically. This is a high fantasy, epic fantasy with some horrific elements in it. It is very battle heavy. It has a lot of lore, a lot of mythology. This to me feels like the complete package. It even has some smut in it. It has amazing characters. It is witty. It is clever. It is just everything I hoped for and more in a vampire book. Now do note that these books are written in an interview style, so it's basically an interview with a vampire. So basically you can jump really quickly from his youth to his education to how Days Dead happened and everything in between. The interview style is done really cleverly, and in book 2 it takes a little bit of a twist that at first I was really mad about, but towards the end of the book I did understand. So Empire of the Damned, which is the second book from the Empire of the Vampire, what I think will be a trilogy, and the third book has already been sent to the publisher or like for review, etc. So I'm super excited for whenever book 3 releases, and I hope it will be like a completed trilogy, because my heart breaks at the end of every book because I just want to know what happens next, and he always leaves us on a cliffhanger, and yeah, it's just beyond amazing. I love these books. So I hope by the end of this video you have at least some vampire themed books that you would like to read. You can find the entire list of books that I've mentioned in the description box of this video, and of course feel free to let me know in a comment down below which is your favorite vampire themed book that you have read this year, because I would love to know. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't already and you'd like to be, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I make new videos every week and I would love to have you for every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!